Good morning everyone and welcome to this new video. Today I am going to deal with an American pedagogue who has left a great mark in terms of precisely modern and contemporary pedagogy, and I am talking in fact about Bruner. Bruner was born in 1915 in New York and in 1952 became a professor of psychology at Harvard University. He was trained in various schools, including very different schools of functionalism, the Gestalt school and behaviorism. Each of these currents has very different views. In fact, in his thinking, he will be influenced by all of these currents and will become one of the initiators of US cognitivism, a psychological current that studies the cognitive processes by which we receive information from the outside and therefore from the environment through our senses. We make it our own, store it, process it, and also know how to handle it. Among its many merits is that it has conducted many experimental studies on cognitive and learning processes. As early as 1960, in fact, he began a series of studies aimed precisely at trying to understand the course of the development of the child's intellect. And already, as we had seen for Vygotsky, for Bruner too, language is responsible for the mental development of the individual, as a social amplifier of the innate capacities of the human being. But the focus of his attention is primarily on all those mental processes that help us in some way to store information from outside, make it our own, then retain it, and then in some way also communicate it with others. A very important event in 1957, that of the launch of Sputnik, the first artificial satellite launched precisely by the Soviet Union, which seemed to have won precisely the race to conquer space with the Americans, raises the doubt in the American culture that something has to change precisely in the way of doing culture of the time. Also because up to now, Dewey's thinking had dominated, and so for more than half a century, Dewey had dictated what were somewhat the laws of the way of doing schooling and the way of doing culture of the time. In 1959 at Woods Hole, a conference was organized where all the thinkers and scholars of socio-pedagogical issues of the time took part, including Bruner, who acted as a bit of a host and established himself as one of the most relevant and most important figures at the level of both the United States, but who also had a great hold at the European level. In 1961, Bruner published the book After Dewey, The Learning Process in the Two Cultures, where all the points will be listed to overcome the didactics and the way of doing schooling of the time, which was still based on Dewey, where it is inferred that education is not only participation in culture, but that it is also very important to develop personal cognitive skills, so that one can overcome what are the conceptions of social culture, make one's own ideas, and above all then make one's own culture. Then that adaptation to society must be constituted by skills training. That is, one must push in such a way that everyone can form skills, in the very literal sense of the word. Skills means knowing how to do something specifically, and therefore giving those basic knowledge that can help us develop these skills, and from always trying to urge to reach new goals, therefore to challenge oneself to always go beyond and always reach new goals. Another very important thing is that the center of teaching programs is the organizing ideas of knowledge, that is, the basic concepts, the structures that enable us to understand things and enable us to bring order to what we already know so that we can then tackle new topics. So, education has to emphasize precisely the structure of knowledge, trying to avoid an overload of notions. Excessive notionism would not help at all. So we have to reduce information and plan teachings that are adapted to the way the mind organizes the information it receives. In this book, we also see that schooling becomes precisely the foundation of social reform. And precisely because of this, it needs continuous and systematic updating so that it can continue to be the benchmark and precisely the foundation of this social reform. In practice, Bruner complements Dewey's program by centering precisely the teaching on the concept of the category of structure. And it is precisely from here that Bruner will be considered the father of pedagogical structuralism, and now let's take a look at how it works. According to the author, every discipline in fact possesses a fundamental structure of guiding ideas, and in turn the mind develops through a capacity for organization, to which then corresponds the ability to organize these structures into internal structures in the mind itself. The school has precisely as its goal to make people learn the structure of the disciplines, which can then foster in each person cognitive organization and the possibility then of autonomous development as the knowledge itself progresses. The learning of these structures allows the student then, as he goes along, to go beyond what is the knowledge that is in some way induced in him, and then make up his own ideas and arrive at reasoning, arrive even beyond precisely this knowledge that he is given. And just hooking into this, Bruner believes that you can teach every individual, every child, anything. Teach anything to anyone, obviously with languages and structures appropriate to the age and mind of the child we are dealing with. Any discipline can be taught at any age, even to children who are part of kindergarten, as long as it is translated according to the cognitive structures and languages related to the mental development of the child and the age under consideration. As time passes, what happens that the same topics are somehow represented, with obviously increasing language and increasing difficulty, in an increasingly broader and deeper form with the actual model of the spiral curriculum. What is this spiral curriculum? It is a kind of learning path that is repeated over time. That is, the topics, as I said, are always the same. However, as you grow, the cognitive structures and abilities of the subjects increase, the degree of difficulty will also be increased, and the language will become more and more structured. All of this, therefore, necessitates the presence of a planning teacher, a teacher who is able to work with all disciplinary structures and is therefore capable of constructing teaching paths suited to the children in front of him or her, according to their needs and abilities. Thus, in both the humanities and science disciplines, according to Bruner, it is very important to give those cornerstones, those basic notions through which then the pupil can, once he has made this knowledge his own, go even further. That is, to find, for example, solutions to problems that are also different from those presented at the time. That is, always finding new solutions to new problems. For example, in the teaching of geometry, one will teach precisely axioms and theorems, a kind of formal codification, precisely through which the child can understand that kind of problem, but can also learn those basic structures in order to then deal, as I said, with problems that are different than those presented to him the first time. In the work toward a theory of education, Bruner tries to define what are the basic steps of his own theory of learning, so that he can help the learner achieve what is precisely the goal we were talking about earlier, the development of certain skills that will be able to help him throughout his life. Meanwhile, for Bruner, learning occurs through three types of representations, which are executive, iconic, and symbolic. The executive one is from birth until about 1 year of age, and at this stage the child represents the world to himself through a series of actions. In fact, his thinking is an operational structure that is manifested by a series and succession precisely of actions. Thus, reality is ordered precisely through action itself, as the child moves and performs actions to achieve a goal. Development as it occurs at this point happens through experience, so these movements, these actions initially will be clumsy, slowly become more linear and fluid. The action the child performs then becomes its internal representation of the object. This mode of representation works even after the first year of life. Just think then of all those actions that once learned we do automatically, such as swimming rather than riding a bicycle, etc. In the second mode of representation, which is the iconic mode and goes until about 7 years of age, the child represents the world through concrete images. It then creates a representation of the world through precisely seeing objects, images and symbols that have a reference of the precise object. The internal image of that object, of that symbol, will then allow the child to evoke precisely situations that are absent in reality at that time, although it will not be possible at this stage to describe them verbally. In the symbolic representation stage, which runs from about age 7 onward, the child will represent the world through an abstract conventional code, so through, for example, symbols, numbers, through music. Language then will enable the child to reason in abstract terms, and the encoding of reality will take place beyond the information given to the child. For Bruner, therefore, the transition from the second phase to the third, and thus from the iconic to the symbolic phase, becomes fundamental, as language will somehow then be able to transform reality. In Towards the Theory of Education, Bruner then specifies how important precisely this discourse on learning is, and how in a complex society such as today's, schools can no longer keep up with what are the constant changes in society itself, changes that see through computerization, also the way of making culture changing continuously. And precisely because of these changes, this technology that is continually changing society, school can no longer give the knowledge that children need for life. Instead, it is necessary, according to Bruner, to focus on the development of learning skills that make the individual capable and skilled as he or she is faced with a new problem, from time to time to develop the new knowledge to solve the problem he or she is faced with. In this view, therefore, an appropriate theory of education must be able to require an organization or structuring of knowledge that is effective, and the teacher must possess various qualities such as disciplinary competence, basic psychological knowledge, and the ability to construct and manage appropriate curricula. For Bruner, the role of the teacher is fundamental. First and foremost, he or she must be able to motivate learning. He or she must be able to present topics in different modes so that all cognitive strategies can be activated, keeping in mind all kinds of different representations of each other. Use intrinsic reinforcement that is helpful in arousing the desire to develop new skills again and again. Make school a true learning environment. For the author, an important means of fostering learning is through play. Play is serious in that it is a primary and functional component of learning. It allows experimentation with new behaviors all the time and thus the ability to find new solutions to reported problems. It fosters the development of new cognitive, motor, relational, and language modalities. Play also allows generalization of certain behaviors that can then be implemented in real life as well. Summing up a bit of all this talk about learning for Bruner, as we had already seen for Vygotsky, the social aspect in learning plays a fundamental role. In this sense, Bruner departs somewhat from the cognitivist approach in favor of how much the social aspect influences learning itself. He therefore deals firstly with the communicative interactions between mother and child, and then secondly also with the interactions the child will have with the outside world. Starting precisely from Vygotsky's area of proximal or potential development, Bruner will first introduce the discourse of scaffolding, and then this scaffolding, this metaphor that is used precisely because of the effect that the adult has on the child. That is, that he helps the child build this scaffolding, this sort of baggage on which the child will then put his own, and then add everything that he will learn. So how important the mediation of the adult becomes in the child's own mental and social growth and development. Another very important concept for Bruner is precisely that of education, and education then becomes precisely the meeting place of two generations confronting each other, the pupil and the referring adult or teacher. And it is that place where the two generations precisely, both the pupil and the teacher, try to give an explanation to the social reality around them. Obviously, precisely because it is an encounter between the two generations, the adult cannot think of transmitting his view of society or the social reality in which they live to the boy, but he must be ready to discuss it with the boy and also to reinterpret it. Education, therefore, aims precisely at fostering this spirit of confrontation, debate, and this sort of bargaining that takes place between the two sides, that is, between the young person's side and the adult side. This can be facilitated through certain disciplines such as art, law, storytelling, and science that precisely allow for debate and confrontation on both sides. Well, With this topic of education and confrontation between the two generations, I have finished my talk on Bruner. If you have any questions or need some clarification, you can always ask me in the comments below. I salute you, thank you for your attention, and refer you to the next video.